In the early morning hours of July 5, 2005, while cruising across the Aegean Sea from the Greek island of Mykonos, 26-year-old newlywed George Smith IV went missing. There were signs that George had been partying heavily the night before. Maybe this was a tragic accident. There were also clues that pointed to foul play. All signs indicated that George had gone overboard. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin and this is Just Thought Lounge. JTL is the true crime channel that delivers serious, well-balanced coverage of the cases that really make you think. Today's case has made headlines internationally. A young, vibrant, and happy newlywed couple, only days into their Mediterranean honeymoon, experienced an unbelievable and confusing tragedy. There have been many theories put forward in the case: an accident, a robbery, a murder. These theories include many suspects and many more witnesses who may very well know far more than they are willing to admit. What really happened that night in cabin 9062? Let's take a look. In the year 2000, George Smith graduated with a business degree from Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Originally from Greenwich, Connecticut, George had a happy upbringing. His father, George Smith III, owned and operated a liquor store. After a few years of working as a computer search engine analyst in Boston, George opted to move back home and help his parents with store operations. He preferred to be active and sociable at work. The family business was a great fit for him. The plan was to learn the business under his father and then ease his parents into a well-earned retirement. George remained very close to his father, his mother Maureen, and his sister Bree. In 2005, at the age of 26, George was starting his new life. In June of that year, he married Jennifer Hagel at the Castle Inn in Newport, Rhode Island, a beautiful venue with the ceremony on the cliffs overlooking views of the ocean. Jennifer, 25, was also from Connecticut. The two had an apartment together in nearby Byram. Jennifer had just recently been offered a new role as a third-grade teacher. Straight from the wedding, the couple set off for a luxury honeymoon aboard the MS Brilliance of the Seas, one of Royal Caribbean's massive cruise ships. It embarked from Barcelona on the 29th of June, stopped for a time on the French Riviera, then cruised down the coast of Italy. The 12-day journey was then meant to travel through the Aegean Sea. During the cruise liner's stop on the Italian coast on the 1st of July, George and Jennifer befriended a family from California, the Askins, after sharing a taxi from the ship. Josh Askin was 20 years old, a bit of a joker, and made quick friends with George. George and Jennifer spent the 4th of July wandering the beautiful windy island of Mykonos. That night, the newlyweds prepared for a fun night of partying. After a romantic dinner, they met up first with another newlywed couple they had recently met. Then, much later in the night, they found Josh Askin at the ship's casino. George and Josh enjoyed some craps. Meanwhile, Jennifer was trying her hand at poker. When the casino closed down for the night, the couple moved on. The last known image of George was taken at this time, at roughly 2:30 a.m., from one of the many security cameras covering the massive ship. George was captured exiting the casino. This did not mark the end of the night, however, and it was clear the next morning that George would eventually return to room 9062. Sometime around 8 a.m., Emily Rausch, a 16-year-old from Chicago, was getting ready for another day of fun in the sun and tourism in her family's cabin on Deck 7. Peering out from her window, Emily noticed what looked like blood smear on the lifeboat canopy. She also noted a smudge along the very edge of the canopy, as though someone, likely very injured, had landed on the canopy before going over the side. This disturbing discovery was situated below room 9062. And it was spotted by multiple passengers in nearby cabins. By 8:30 a.m., staff had been notified, and 10 minutes later, with both Jennifer and George still unaccounted for, the ship's chief officer entered the room. The cabin was subsequently blocked off with an armed officer guarding the door. Meanwhile, the search for Jennifer and George continued. At 10 a.m., Jennifer was located at the ship's spa, where she had been having a pre-scheduled massage. She said she had no idea where her husband was. She had not seen him since the night before. By this point, it was undeniable what the stains on the canopy were, and that George was not on the ship. Jennifer was informed at that time that her husband had gone overboard.
Men dressed in white uniform from Royal Caribbean, they basically approached me and said, you know, your husband's gone overboard. And, you know, they told me about the blood on the awning. They said he'd gone overboard and they found blood. And
the ship had sailed from the Greek island into Turkish waters. Jennifer was taken to the police station for questioning. With the little information that was available, she was immediately considered a suspect in what may have been foul play. At noon, Turkish authorities boarded the ship.
As some of you may notice today, we have been a bit of unusual activity on board the ship. The crew and I have been working with the local authorities and some guests on board to investigate whether a person may have gone overboard last night, or I can say early this morning. We hope to have the issue resolved shortly.
They photographed room 9062 and took blood samples from the lifeboat canopy. The room was in disarray. It had either been rapidly searched through, purposefully trashed, or the scene of a struggle. There were blood droplets on the carpet and on a towel in the bathroom, both quite small. There was also what could be a handprint visible on the balcony railing. Turkish investigators also discovered 2 small bloodstains on the bedsheets, each only about 2 centimeters in length. Tests confirmed this was George's blood, as well as that on the lifeboat canopy below the balcony. It was enough to conclude that George had sustained some form of injury inside the room before his fall. A chair on the balcony had been shifted to sit right next to the railing. Also observed on the railing was an impression described as a butt mark made by the dew. This suggested to some, including the ship's captain, that George had been sitting on it and then perhaps fell off the side. But it was a tall railing, and the blood on the canopy and inside the room suggested something more had occurred. Foul play seemed most likely. Investigators set out to retrace George's movements the night before, leading up to the tragic incident. Specifically, they need to track down who he had been spending time with. 19-year-old Greg Rosenberg was on the cruise with family and friends. Amongst them was his cousin, Zach Rosenberg, and a friend, Rostolov Rusty Kaufman. The 3 men, all in their late teens, were naturalized American citizens of Russian descent. The families lived in New York. At the casino, Jennifer and Greg played poker together late into the evening. When it shut down at 2:30, the group moved on together, including all 3 of the Russians, as well as George, Jennifer, and Josh Askin. They went to the disco. They had also acquired one more into their happy party, a man named Lloyd Botha. Lloyd was a casino supervisor who joined the group as they continued on for some dancing and drinking. Here the timeline begins to diverge, as individuals began to split off from the group. Josh returned to his cabin just after 3 a.m. to retrieve a special bottle of absinthe that he had purchased in Italy. The alcohol content in absinthe can range anywhere from 45 to over 70%. It is legal in Europe, but certain ingredients, including those with hallucinogenic qualities, are regulated. It is an extremely strong drink regardless. Passengers are not allowed to consume their own alcohol when on board. But George, having a bit of fun, helped the younger man to sneak the bottle aboard the ship by tucking it into the band of his shorts when they boarded the ship. Sometime after 3 a.m., a cleaner on staff noticed that the group of young men, Greg, Zach, and Rusty, alongside Josh and George, were all taking shots from a bottle of their own liquor, which they appeared to be trying, unsuccessfully, to keep concealed. And they were not the only ones getting tipsy. Jennifer, who had been observed at the casino composed and relatively sober, had turned visibly wobbly, leaning on the casino supervisor Lloyd either to keep her balance or flirtatiously. Witnesses reported perceiving her behavior very differently. The same was true for what happened next. George had words with his new wife, perhaps sternly because of her behavior or jokingly due to joyful drinking. Jennifer kicked at George, maybe playfully, perhaps in anger. She called it a night after the encounter and left the disco. It was roughly 3:30 a.m. and Jennifer stumbled out. George was left behind with his new friends. When Turkish authorities boarded the ship to initiate their investigation, they made the bizarre choice to gather all the men together for joint questioning. The Russians explained how George had been inebriated the night before. They helped him back to his cabin, placed him in bed, removed his shoes, and left. This was at roughly 4 a.m.
And then we couldn't find her. She was gone. And then we came back to George's room and put him in bed, and then we went to sleep. We closed the door. We never saw him. Never saw him again. He said a story. That was it. Never saw him again.
Jennifer was not in the cabin when George was dropped off, they said. But she had left the party much earlier, so she definitely should have made it back to the cabin before her husband. It seems that Josh Askin had a suggestion which could explain Jennifer's absence. He claimed to have seen the casino worker, Lloyd, leave the disco with Jennifer the night before. They had been cozy with each other, Josh said, an assertion that was backed by both Zach Rosenberg and Rusty Kaufman, who believed that Jennifer was having a fling with Lloyd, even to the point of brazenly carrying on with him in front of George after the group had left the casino. When Josh was brought into the police station for further questions, he was emphatic that the authorities look into the relationship with Lloyd Botha. The implication was that Lloyd may have something to do with George's disappearance. His father videotaped the questioning for his own protection. The translator's child cried throughout.
And then you left the casino is closed. You went to the club and you took George to the room. He was very drunk.
She was with another man.
Bir başka erkek miydi?
The casino manager Lloyd. You need to get him in here.
The problem with Josh's theory of an affair was manifold. First, no one aside from Josh Askin and the Russians recalled seeing Lloyd leave with Jennifer that night. Lloyd's keycard records have him entering his own cabin at 3:25 a.m., a fact verified by his girlfriend who was awoken when he entered. Jennifer was found stumbling towards Deck 9 to find her cabin by the same cleaner that had observed the men drinking earlier. He assisted her to the elevator and watched as she turned right off of the lift when it reached her deck. The only problem was that her cabin was on the left. Jennifer was discovered sometime later, at 4:30 a.m., passed out asleep in the hallway, a considerable distance from her room. 2 security guards and a female supervisor used a wheelchair to deliver her back to her bed. When they entered the cabin at 4:52 a.m., George was not there. The curtains to the balcony doors were fully closed. They were also stationary, not blowing from the breeze, so the doors behind them were also closed. Had George gone out on the balcony on his own after his new friends had left him in his bed, would he have closed both the curtains and the door behind him when he stepped out? When Jennifer awoke the next morning, George was still not in bed. This was not as strange as one might think, though. She assumed that he had crashed out in a friend's cabin after being out all night. He had already done this only a few nights earlier on in their trip. Jennifer arose around 8 a.m. and left for her appointment at the spa. She was not concerned about her husband's whereabouts. There were several working theories of what had happened to George Smith. Captain Michael Lecteridis, having been informed of the passenger's excessive drinking and what he perceived was a mark of someone sitting on the balcony railing, determined that the death was an accident. George had slipped off. He explained away the blood inside the room by suggesting that perhaps George had experienced a minor nosebleed.
Yeah, JP, we were hearing about these reports of hallucinations. How wide-ranging are they, and how severe could they be?
Well, that depends on the strength of the thujone. Now, you can buy absinthe in a lot of countries in Europe, but the European Union restricts the amount of thujone, the active ingredient, to 10 parts per million. So that's not very much. However, there is available a lot of black market absinthe, which people make in their own private stills, producing this stuff for sale on the black market, and that can be 5 or 10 times stronger. So you can actually get a much more strongly hallucinogenic product.
Do you think it could have played a role in this case somehow?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And any absinthe that is sold in Europe does not contain enough thujone to cause any hallucinations. I would have to consume about 3 liters of absinthe at the European limit to have any clinically discernible effects from thujone, and I'd be long dead from the alcohol by that point.
Both George and Jennifer appeared to have undergone a rapid decline in their sobriety over the period of only an hour the night before. Jennifer and George were observed as relatively composed as late as 2:30 a.m. when leaving the casino. But by 3:30 a.m., however, both were incapable of independently making it back to their rooms. Was it possible one or both of them had been drugged? In support of this theory were multiple accounts from casino goers that the newlyweds had been openly bragging about the amount of money they had back in their room, either from wedding gifts or from their casino winnings. The amounts mentioned by witnesses varied, but all in the tens of thousands. Were they targeted for a robbery? George wore a pricey Breitling watch, a gift from Jennifer and his best man. Jennifer's engagement and wedding ring also spoke to the potential wealth of the young couple. Had their room been trashed in an effort to locate this money? Money that, according to the Smith family, likely did not exist. Supporting this theory, however, were the very small marks of blood found on the bedsheet, which appeared consistent with scratches that could be made by roughly removing the wristband of George's new watch. The Turkish investigation had failed in the eyes of Jennifer Hagel-Smith and the rest of George's family. It was a rushed investigation that turned over little of use. The cruise line was told that it was appropriate to clean the scene of the potential crime only hours later. The stains were cleared away by the end of the day. Months later, with few answers, the Smiths hired Dr. Henry Lee, a forensic scientist, to conduct testing in the room and on the balcony. Tests that the original investigators never conducted and may offer insight into the crime or the likelihood that George had fallen accidentally.
Certainly you can see the height of the balcony. It's pretty clear that somebody will not just fall over that balcony. So either he was pushed, I'm talking about George Smith, of course, was either pushed or, in a stupor, he climbed up on a chair and fell over. But, there's a lot that argues against that.
Dr. Lee had wished to conduct another test involving a mannequin, which would seek to replicate a fall from the balcony. The Royal Caribbean Cruise Line refused to allow this particular test. The refusal was one of many obstacles that the Smith family felt the company was placing in the way of their efforts to find the truth.
We did conduct different experiment, measurement, study. We did check the cabin, the canopy, and the balcony. We did a couple of experiments. However, I'm not going to share with you the detail of the experiment. That's part of the agreement.
The FBI had also become involved, although much of what they uncovered was held from public view. It was clear that their central focus was on the 4 younger men with George that night: Josh Askin and the 3 Russians, Greg and Zach Rosenberg, and Rusty Kaufman. Much of their story did not align with what other witnesses on the ship had reported. Next door to the Smiths' cabin was Cleet Hyman, a deputy police chief on vacation with his wife. Cleet heard a disturbance in 9062, loud partying at first at just after 4 a.m. He called the guest relations desk to report the noise and also banged on the wall and shouted at the partiers. This was followed by several minutes of silence.
Then all we could hear was loud talking in the room for, probably 3 minutes. But then all of a sudden there became some very loud arguing out on the balcony. This went on for a couple of minutes, and then we heard someone saying good night, just repeatedly, like they were trying to usher people out of the room. You could hear furniture being moved, and then at times it sounded like furniture was being actually picked up and dropped.
When these noises subsided, passengers heard a horrific thud.
Maybe 2 minutes or so of total silence, and then that horrific thud.
When Cleet opened his door to look out into the hallway, he recalls seeing 3 men, though he could not identify who they were. Several other passengers also reported hearing the loud noise, almost certainly the sound of George hitting the canopy. One witness reported hearing a woman scream immediately following. There is no evidence to indicate that a woman was in the room at that time. The 4 young men reported entering the room, but only 3 were seen in the hallway afterwards. Did one of these men stay behind to ransack the room, perhaps in search of the thousands the Smiths were rumored to have? The theory of a robbery gone wrong seemed the most plausible. The young men, however, claimed to have a verifiable alibi. At 4:31 a.m., only minutes from the time that the 3 men were seen in the hallway outside of George's room, there was a call placed for room service from a room on deck 3, registered to one of the 3 Russians. The timing was so close between these events that it seemed improbable for both the deputy and the Russians to be telling the truth. Also, keycard records showed George's room was entered at 4:05 a.m., just as the Rosenbergs and Rusty had reported. It did not show the men re-entering the room. The Connecticut FBI case was later taken up by the New York office as the Smiths continued to apply pressure, largely through the massive media coverage that the case had been receiving. Meanwhile, their united front with George's new wife had crumbled. There had been scrutiny of Jennifer's behavior immediately following the incident, commentary that she appeared too composed in public, and suspicion surrounding the lack of information that she was willing to share.
I know you're doing your job and you have to ask, but again, my number one priority, and I'm going to say this again and again, is just, doing what the FBI has told me, and basically,
The last straw for the Smiths came when Jennifer accepted an independent settlement in her lawsuit against Royal Caribbean for $1.1 million. In doing so, she would not move forward in a joint case against the cruise line with the Smiths, who were frustrated at the company's lack of transparency and their handling of the investigation with Turkish authorities. The Smiths were taking Jennifer to trial over her agreed settlement. The family alleged that their former daughter-in-law quickly settled with the cruise line to avoid embarrassing details about that night on the ship from becoming public. Jennifer argued that the family refused to acknowledge that their son's use of prescription drugs and alcohol may have caused an accidental fall.
He would have been a loyal father and husband to Jennifer Hagel for many years, and unfortunately, I am 100% convinced he was betrayed.
2.5 months after my son is dead, she comes to our house and has dinner, and across the table she says to me, "I want to get on with my life." I looked at her like, how can you do this to your husband? 2.5 months after his death, you don't want answers, you want to get on with your life?
It's clear that Jennifer's hiding something, so I think that in this case, it was in Jen's best interest to settle so that the truth did not come out.
Jennifer Hagel Smith claimed to remember little to nothing that took place after about 2:30 a.m. that night. She was unaware that she had been found in the hallway or brought back to her room by cruise staff. Jennifer was given a polygraph test by the FBI. So was the accused casino manager, Lloyd Botha. They both passed. Josh Askin and the Russians were also given polygraphs. The FBI informed Josh Askin that he had failed his, but it's unclear if that is the case or was a tactic to prompt further information from him. A videotape recorded by the Russians on the afternoon of George's death recorded the 3 men callously joking about what had occurred. The tape is in the possession of the FBI, and they have released only brief statements from it, but these are incriminating. At one point in the video, one of the men, left unidentified, clearly states, "We gave that guy a paragliding lesson without a parachute." In 2009, all 4 of the men were deposed as eyewitnesses in the questionable death investigation. Zach Rosenberg was asked what he knew about the death of George Smith.
I'd like to invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
Do you know if George Smith was murdered?
I'd like to invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
Do you know who killed George Smith?
I'd like to invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
Do you have a belief as to how George Smith died?
I would like to invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
The questioning of Josh Askin went in a similar manner. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Josh, who had eagerly pointed the finger at the casino manager the day after George went missing, also insisted that he was in the cabin bathroom while Zach and Rusty looked after George. He did not see where in the room George was when he said goodbye and left. The implication, of course, is that if something had happened during that time, it did not involve him.
invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
Were you present when George Smith was killed?
I invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
Did you play a part in the death of George Smith?
I invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
There was one of the group that was less close-lipped about the events of that night, however, Greg Rosenberg. Giving his deposition from a Florida state prison where he was serving a 3-year sentence for drug trafficking, Greg was happy to share his thoughts.
Because I want to know what happened that night, honestly. Because I already explained to you, I've been through it and back, accused of nothing. And that's the honest truth. Now I sit in front of this camera and say accused of something that I, through people in my neighborhood in Boca Raton and on the internet, and they blast my name. For what? Because I chose to try to help. That's why I want to know. I'd like to know. I wish I was good in law because I'd make a point of it.
What would you ask Jennifer if you could?
Why she left, and where was she, and how do you end up in the spa, and then you say you had passed out in the solarium, and then whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that go through your head in the last 4 or 5 years since that happened. We all grew up, you know what I'm saying?
So
But
something from that night just doesn't make sense.
none of it does. None of it makes sense.
Do you think Jennifer was involved?
No comment. No comment.
Okay. How about Lloyd Botha?
No comment. I can't incriminate individuals that I don't know, but I know George Allen Smith did not disappear or kill himself or hurt himself or slip and fall off a boat at 6'4" or however tall he is and just dive off. I know that didn't happen. So something crazy went down that night. And I hope one day that they find out the truth.
Greg restated the claim that the group had room service that night, a key element of the alibi that the men had relied on. The central issue with this claim, however, is that service logs from the ship did not show this order. Additionally, the group had been formally banned from using this service the day prior, after more than one profanity-laced phone call to room service had resulted in a visit by ship security. The cruise line has no record of any order being delivered. Quite the opposite. They had the statements of multiple staff who had been instructed prior to that night to refuse the men's service.
Who ordered the room service?
I remember what we ate, but I don't remember who ordered it.
All right, what'd you eat?
Tuna fish sandwiches, I know that. We had like tuna fish sandwiches and I think cheeseburgers. I know we had something that fast food type.
How long did it take for the food to show up, do you know?
No, I don't remember that.
Was it like 20 minutes or?
Probably, that's what it takes. It's pretty quiet at night, so they probably delivered it fast.
But you figure burger and stuff, they gotta cook it, so.
Yeah, tuna. I think it was mainly just tuna fish sandwiches with Swiss cheese and.
Okay. This now, did George and Jennifer actually seem to be happy? Because this is also in Josh's statement, and Josh, you know, from what we can tell, didn't think they were happy.
He's so drastic, man, dramatic type dude, man. I never seen no unhappiness. They were both so drunk and happy. That's how I looked at it.
One final claim from Josh Askin was that Greg Rosenberg had left the room after the group ordered food.
Food fest was going on. Did you leave the room?
No, not that I remember, no.
Because Josh claims that at some point you left the room. Never left the room. You were always there.
I was chilling.
Okay. All right. Do you know why he would say that?
I don't know. Left the room.
In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered while parked in his car in his own driveway in Davie, Florida. Police believe that he was ambushed and that he was purposefully targeted. There had been no attempt at a robbery and several shots fired.
He was shot multiple times and the suspect fled the area. We believe in a white SUV BMW X3, X5 series, possibly driven by someone else, and they fled the neighborhood.
Rosenberg may have taken the truth of what happened to Smith with him when he died, and Davie police are hoping to find the truth behind his murder case now. We've been investigating this case since it started, and we won't stop until it's solved.
Investigators have explored the possibility of a link between the death of George Smith and the much later murder of Greg Rosenberg. His murder remains unsolved. The Smith family later came to believe that their son fell victim to a robbery gone wrong. In the years since, they have abandoned their suspicions of Jennifer Hagel. They managed to renegotiate the amount paid out in the lawsuit against Royal Caribbean, increasing Jennifer's $1.1 million to $1.3 million and splitting the amount amongst the family. Included in this deal was an agreement to hand over the cruise line's investigative file on the disappearance, which included witness statements made to the cruise line and to Turkish authorities by those who saw George before he went missing. Jennifer has remarried and started a family. She has made a career working for charities and other nonprofits, and her family is grateful she was able to move on. For George's sister Bree and his parents, moving on with so few answers and such little closure has been nearly impossible.
I think, foremost in our mind is who would have done this and why. We don't know any of those things right now. There haven't been any arrests. We know the FBI has a lot of information, but we don't have that information, and we just want to know what happened to him. And secondly, I think we'd like to know where he is. I mean, I think we have an idea, but if we had at least George, we could bury him and have a grave to visit and pray for him. But instead, he's in the middle of the sea, and we don't have anything of him. So it's really devastating for my family.
After the cruise liner's documents failed to reveal George's murderer, the Smiths offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and convictions of those responsible. They have also called for a boycott on Royal Caribbean, who they say have actively covered up the murder in favor of their company profits. The disappearance of George Smith remains unsolved. Thanks for watching. I'm Kevin. This is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.